This morning I wanted to address the experience and feeling of guilt from a Buddhist perspective. So in our practice, we are becoming more and more mindful, right? Mindful of our actions, thinking about right speech, right action, mindful of our own feelings, our own responses to the world, our own thoughts. And so one of the things that can come up as a question for people, whether we are engaging in those practices or not, but is how to deal with guilt that comes up, particularly if we do start looking back on previous choices and previous actions. There can be a sense of guilt for what we've done, who we've been, and even then ongoing as we try to cultivate the mind. Perhaps we lose control sometimes. We say things that hurt, and if we're holding ourselves to a higher standard, then we can really find that we get lost in guilt. And so when we do something harmful, when we cause hurt, if we recognize it as so, if we recognize it as something that led to harm, then we feel bad, right? And so we recognize that pain in somebody else. We recognize that we don't want other people to feel pain, and we certainly don't want to be the cause either. And so then if it seems like we are the cause, then we of course we feel bad. And it's good to recognize this, and that there is some sense of bad feeling at first in recognizing that, and that's not necessarily malicious. There's nothing really wrong yet, but then our minds take this sort of bad feeling and turn it into what, from a Buddhist perspective, is a useless mind, guilt. Because guilt is where we judge ourselves as bad due to the wrong actions or the wrong behaviors. And so it's this, I'm bad. I'm a horrible person. I'm such a selfish person. I'm such an arrogant person. I'm, whatever it is. And it can turn into, I'm just inept. I'm useless. I'm a failure. I'm a failure at my practice. I'm a bad Buddhist, or I'm a, whatever it is. And it sort of spirals a little bit. And it stirs up all those old stories, perhaps, that we've been carrying around with us, doesn't it? Maybe the stories that you were told when you were younger by parents, siblings, school teachers, by religion, or stories we told ourselves. And so what our mind has done here is taken a behavior, an action, and has fused it with your very sense of self. And so they've become one and the same. You've hyperfixated on this action as being part and parcel of who you are. So they are one and the same now. And this, in psychology, we call this cognitive fusion. And so now, instead of there being a person who sometimes has these kinds of thoughts, and sometimes has negative thoughts, and sometimes does kind things, and this, and all of these different, a whole array of experience. Instead of that, instead we have bad behavior and a person, and we have combined them two, and now we have a bad person. And why would you love or show kindness towards a bad person? You wouldn't, right? We judge them ourselves. We judge that self. We hate it. We have contempt for it. We show it no kindness. Because why would I? It's a bad person. And we do the same to other people as well when we witness bad behavior. We fuse the two. Bad person. And why would I forgive? Why would I have kindness for a bad person? And so from the point of view of the Dharma, whenever we judge ourselves and not just the actions, we are being deluded. Because there's no such thing as an inherently bad or evil person, yourself or others included. You only make it so when you attend to that behavior and you fuse the two. And the worst part about this mind of guilt and judging ourselves and making ourselves sort of feel bad or punishing ourselves is it doesn't address the behavior. Because you've stopped looking there. You're no longer looking at the behavior, the bad action. Instead, you're looking at this creation, this concept, this bad you. And then you're beating yourself up with this stick of guilt and shame, and it turns into self-hatred. And so you're not addressing the behavior anymore. It doesn't matter about the behavior. I'm a bad person and I need to be punished. And so we, withhold kindness and love towards ourselves, and either, in terms of our feelings or in our outer environment as well. And so Buddhism doesn't encourage guilt. And historically, actually, some of you know there isn't even a word for guilty in Tibetan. And some of you will recall the almost famous story, really, of when the Dalai Lama was asked in one of the Mind and Life conferences by Sharon Salzberg, what does he think about self-hatred? The conversation was about loving kindness and practice and engaging in that practice for the self. And so Sharon Salzberg said, because there's such this problem in the West of self-hatred and self-contempt and guilt and shame, and so it could directly address this. And whilst I think my teacher Alan Wallace was interpreting, and as they were explaining this, that I was like, hang on a minute, what's this self-hatred, what's this guilt and shame, what's this self-contempt? And it wasn't that the translation wasn't good, it's just that it didn't really compute, it wasn't really such a phenomenon in Tibetan culture. And eventually the Dalai Lama said, how could you think that of yourself when you have Buddha nature? How could you feel such hatred for yourself when you have a Buddha potential within you? And so the Buddhist view is radically different, that the essential nature of all beings, the essential nature of yourself is pure, is radiant. Your true nature, your mind's true nature is not bad, it's not unworthy, it's not horrible, it's not a bad person. Your essential nature could be likened to like a clear, vast blue sky that's unobstructed. It's in the nature of clarity, luminosity. But just as we see clouds can sometimes cover the sky, so too can the afflictions of jealousy, anger, and hatred. They can cover the purity of our mind. But although they sometimes cover and obscure that, they do not become one. Beneath, above the level of the clouds and beyond the clouds, there is still that purity. And the afflictions of jealousy, anger, and hatred and so on are temporary. They arise, but then they pass by. And so they are not innate in you, they are not who you are, because we see that they're temporary. And so, no word in Tibetan for guilty, which is interesting, but the closest thing that they do have is a word that translates to, roughly, intelligent regret that decides to do things differently. Which is just very, very different to what guilt is trying to do, isn't it? And so this points to the alternative. Guilt is seen as irrelevant and unnecessary because there's no external authority to pass judgment on your behavior. And so, perhaps sometimes this guilt, and we can feel guilty for things we don't even need to feel bad about as well. And it can, in our culture, perhaps is a leftover from other traditions that do emphasize guilt and feeling, a great sense of shame for what we've done. And so what is relevant and what is necessary from a Buddhist perspective is to take that bad feeling that we feel. There's going to be a bad feeling, of course, if you've caused harm. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But we take that bad feeling and we channel it into, in the Mahayana tradition, what we call the 4 opponent powers. And these 4 opponent powers, they are regret, rely or remind, remedy, and resolve. And this, I just think, is really good behavioral change, in essence. And it's considered, in the Mahayana tradition, this is how you purify negative karma, based on the idea that there are opposing forces. That for this negativity and harm that we've caused, we can overwhelm that with positivity and goodness. This is based on the Buddha's advice. Refrain from harm, cultivate good. And so regret, that's that first, that we have that bad feeling, and so we regret that action. Not guilt, not shame, not I'm a bad person, just we recognize, okay, that action was not wholesome, that action was harmful, and so I regret that action. Then the second of rely or remedy. This is, rely or remind. If you are Buddhist, you might remind yourself and you might rely upon the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, what they represent, what they teach, what they're helping you with. If we're not Buddhist, or, if we could think about God or something else, and if we're none of those, then we just think about your highest ideals. The fact that you want to be a kinder, more compassionate person, you remind yourself of those qualities that you hold dear, those qualities you aspire for, and you rely upon those. Then the remedy, this is the opposing force. And so if we need to apologize for our actions, if we need to pick up the broken pieces, as it were, we do that. But we cultivate the opposing mind. So if we harmed out of anger, then we cultivate compassion, we cultivate patience, we cultivate that opposing mind that opposes the anger. And then resolve, and this is the important part, is just this simple, okay, I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to engage in this action again. And we need to be realistic, of course. We say, I'm never going to get angry for the rest of my life. Maybe that one's not realistic. But we could say, you know what, I'm going to do my best not to lose my patience with so-and-so for the rest of the day. Maybe that's realistic. And so we've set that goal and we've gone through these actions. And then tomorrow it's the same thing. If we happen to lose our patience again, we regret what we've said, we rely upon those qualities we care about, we remedy however we can, and then we resolve, okay, I'm going to try and do better. This is so much more effective and practical than guilt. Guilt is just not doing anything. Guilt is just, you're stuck in the same old loop. You haven't changed your behavior in any way. You're just upsetting yourself and you're feeling really bad about it, and you're falling into this pit of guilt and shame and sadness. Here, these 4 actions, okay, I can actually channel it into something and know that I'm just doing my best. I'm doing my best, and we're always just trying to do our best. And so we channel this bad feeling into these 4. And then in dealing with any residual experiences of guilt, because that will happen from time to time, it's a habit, then we try to respond with kindness, with compassion, right? Loving kindness, recognizing I am not my behavior. I'm not fusing the two, right? That my mind is clear and radiant, and just temporarily these afflictions come, and I'm doing my best to deal with them, but they are not who I am. They're not innate in me. I'm not an angry person just because anger arises sometimes. And as we know, last point, there are some languages which frame the way that they talk about emotions in such a great way, such as saying there is anger within me rather than I am angry. Because even in our language, we fuse the two. I am angry. I am, it's my whole being is angry. But then to say there is anger arising within me gives a sense of spaciousness, that there's a lot of space there. There is some anger, but there's also not anger here. And so it's not who I am, but it's a part of experience.